anglers, welcome to Teaching Efficient Anglers Club for May 2022. I'm Captain Lance Valentine. Hey, we've got some really exciting stuff, some stuff we really haven't ever really covered in the Teaching Efficient Anglers Club coming up here in May. We're going to talk about inland lake walleye. You know, in our part of the world, the Great Lakes kind of dominate the walleye fishing that we do, but in most parts of the walleye country, inland lakes are where fishing is, and May is a great time to talk about it because around the walleye belt, this is when opening day actually happens in most states. So we're going to talk about inland lake walleye, how they're different from Great Lakes walleye, how to understand what kind of bait options are in that, how that affects the fishing, when, where, and how you're going to have to catch those fish, how to determine lake types to help you find the right lake, and we're going to talk a little bit about presentations, basic presentations to get you started catching inland lake walleye. Don't miss it. Join us this month, May 2022, Teaching Efficient Anglers Club, talking about inland lake walleye.
Just the facts.
It's a fact that fluorocarbon fishing line is here to stay, and in the right applications, it can help us catch more fish. Fluorocarbon is not negatively affected by exposure to sunlight or water, and it has a refractive index close to that of water, so it's almost invisible to the fish when we fish it. But be sure that you select the right fluorocarbon for your application. If you need a leader or you're tying crawler harnesses, make sure that you grab a fluorocarbon leader material. It's stiffer, a little bit thicker, it has more abrasion resistant, and it's going to hold up to constant use. A trollable fluorocarbon has a little bit of stretch in it, and unlike mono, it doesn't have to be changed as often because it's not affected by UV rays and water. And lastly, a limp castable fluorocarbon is your best choice if you want to use it as the main line on a reel in situations that fluorocarbon can give you an advantage. Buy the right fluorocarbon, spool it up, and I promise you'll catch more fish this season.
Just the facts.
Welcome into Teaching Fishing Coffee Hour Plus for today. It is, let me see my screen over here. It is May 11th, 2002, and summer is kind of showing itself. It is here. Fish on Detroit River continues to be good. A lot of our friends on both Lake Erie and Saginaw Bay are having a tough time with the wind. It's getting a little tougher, but fishing should be kicking off pretty good. I got a nice report today. One of my buddies down on Lake St. Clair catching some big smallmouth. So fishing is in full swing. Summer is kind of starting to slowly make an appearance. We're into, if you look at remember our calendar periods from a couple of weeks ago, we are kind of in that pre-spawn, spawn, post-spawn, depending on what fish you're targeting, and fishing is good right now, one of the best times of the year. So make sure you're going to get out. All right, a couple things to do tonight. We're going to kick off our educational part of this with fluorocarbon line. You know, fluorocarbon line is a big deal. Hope you saw just the facts we ran before we started tonight. Fluorocarbon in the right application is an amazing tool for us to use, and we're going to talk about those right applications and picking the proper fluorocarbon line tonight. Then we're going to take a quick little break. Then we're going to come back, and after the break tonight, kind of our fun time tonight, I want to talk about gorpers, people who move in when they see people catch fish. I want to talk a little bit about etiquette. I want to talk a little bit about why people don't like them, and how to actually do it properly. Actually, how to actually see somebody catch fish, move into the spot properly, be part of the group, and actually really most of the time be welcomed, as opposed to being somebody that another boat would like to shoot a flare across the bow. So we're going to talk about gorping and kind of how to move into a spot. So that's going to be our fun topic after a quick break. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Hi, everybody. How's everybody doing? Gary, hope you're doing well. Good to see everybody. And I want to talk a little bit after the break about a little bit of fishing world news. I want to talk about that as we wrap up tonight. Somebody pretty important to the fishing world passed away. I want to talk about kind of the impact of what I call the big three, and the fourth person we could actually add to make the Mount Rushmore of fishing. I just want to spend a few minutes talking about those guys at the end of the night. So let's get started with our educational part, fluorocarbon line. Now look at, in the big scheme of things, fishing line is probably the least expensive part of everything that we do, right? You know, it definitely doesn't cost the same as a rod or a reel or some of the baits that we use, but it is the most important piece of our presentation puzzle. Number one, it's our only link between us and the fish of a lifetime, right? If we ever hook that fish, or any fish that we catch, but definitely if we get a chance to catch fish for a lifetime, the only link between us and that fish is the fishing line. That has to be good. The right fishing line also makes the presentation good. There are applications that if you don't use the right fishing line, take vertical jigging for example, right? If you use a really soft, low diameter mono, you're not going to catch as many fish as you do with a braid. And fishing line is application specific. In 2022, one of the things that I think has come a long, long way from the old days is fishing line and picking the right exact fishing line, abrasion resistance, proper amount of stretch, the right diameter, the right ability to see it or to have the fish not see it. Those things, we can get really specific with our fishing line. That's what I want to talk about tonight, focusing on fluorocarbon lines. So let's go ahead, and get started. So fluorocarbon line, what are the huge advantages of fluorocarbon? Why is this such a big deal? Well, number one, the biggest advantage of fluorocarbon is not negatively affected by UV rays or water. Two things that kill monofilament are sunlight and water. Well, we have a tendency to catch a lot of fish in the water outside. So sunlight and water kills monofilament. It destroys the molecular, easy for me to say, the molecular structure. It breaks the line down, makes it necessary to change line often if you're using monofilament. Fluorocarbon does not do that. You can leave your rods out in the sun. You can leave your line just being out in the day, like I do in the pontoon. I just leave everything on the pontoon. In the water, it's not going to soak up water and stretch and lose its properties like monofilament does. So it makes it a much better option for a lot of fishing. Because of that, it lasts longer than monofilament. We're not changing it as often. We're not recalibrating, because as monofilament gets wet, it starts to stretch. So you have to recalibrate every once in a while, even if the line doesn't wear out, because it loses its actual diameter. The diameter gets smaller and it doesn't fill the reel as much. Fluorocarbon is great in specific applications. We're going to talk about those a little bit later tonight. And one of the things that I think is probably the least important part of fluorocarbon, but was a big deal when fluorocarbon first came out, the refractive index of fluorocarbon is about the same as the refractive index of water, which means we are assuming it's basically invisible to the fish. So we'll see. Another thing that I forgot to put there, fluorocarbon, the right fluorocarbon in the right situation is more sensitive than a mono is. Something to think about. So those are the advantages of fluorocarbon line. All right, let's talk about the different types of fluorocarbon line, because one of the mistakes I see a lot of people make is they use fluorocarbon as a very generic, yeah, I use fluorocarbon. Well, okay, that's like saying I drive a car, right? Fluorocarbon is very, very, very specific. So let's talk about the first type of fluorocarbon I think we need to know as walleye fishermen, and that's a leader material. I use Sunline Super Fluorocarbon. That is my favorite. It's very inexpensive. It's a little bit thicker diameter. It's very abrasion resistant and very stiff, which is what a leader material should be if we're running leaders for vertical jigging, if we're running leaders for trolling, if we're trying crawler harnesses. This is the line you want to use. You want to use a good quality leader material. I like Sunline Super Fluoro. Abrasion resistant, a little bit higher diameter. It's the stiffest of the fluorocarbons. And again, it's great for leaders, harnesses, tying up trolling rigs, right? If you're going to tie meat rigs for salmon fishing, you want a very, very stiff leader material fluorocarbon. So anytime you are at the business end, you want to make sure that you're using a leader material. I like the stiffness of leader material on my trolling rod. So I'll run, I'm going to talk to you about the fluorocarbon I run on my main line with my trolling rods, but my leaders are this. I like them stiffer. They give the baits a little more action. The stiffer that line is, it hangs a little stiffer and it gives the baits a little more action. So this is something you should have in your boat, right? You can buy a good spool of it, 16 pound, 20 pound, what I use for most of my walleye fishing. 200-yard spool should cost you somewhere around 13, 14 bucks. You can tie a lot of 6-foot leaders with 200 yards of fishing line. It's going to last you forever. So make sure you've got some good quality leader material for stiff line applications. Okay. All right. Next one I want to talk about is something fairly new, and that is what we're going to call a casting or a trolling fluorocarbon. Now, Sunline was the first company to do this. They came out with what was called FC Crank. That's what I have right here, Crank FC, Crank fluorocarbon. One of the issues with fluorocarbon traditionally is it didn't have a lot of stretch in it. So if you kind of put the hammer to a fish, originally fluorocarbon would actually just snap. It didn't have a lot of built-in stretch. Well, if you're fishing crankbaits or spinner baits, which is where this was designed for, because remember, abrasion resistance, low diameter, right? Great knot strength. That's all advantages of fluorocarbon. But we needed a little bit of stretch for the bass guys fishing crankbaits and spinner baits mostly. So they came up with a fluorocarbon. They formulated a fluorocarbon that has a little bit of stretch in it. Myself and a bunch of guys in the walleye world loved it for trolling. And now they came out with the same exact line, but labeled for walleye guys. It's called Troll FC and comes in a little bit bigger spools, obviously, because we need a little more line. But this is a fluorocarbon. Couple things: thin diameter, 16 pound FC Crank or FC Troll is the same diameter as 10 pound Berkeley XT 013, 13 thousandths of an inch, which works perfect on the Precision Trolling app. It's oval shaped, so it fills the reel better. A round line has a tendency to sit on top of each other. An oval line sits in between, so you can actually get more line on your spool. It has a little bit of stretch, about 16 to 18% stretch built in, which is perfect for pulling crankbaits, casting crankbaits, casting spinnerbaits. It gives those fish just enough stretch to kind of not snap the fluorocarbon, and it gives us good control. And again, it's because it is fluorocarbon, very abrasion resistant for clips. Now, if I don't have a mess on my rods, I'm on my, Jeremy's on it 3 seasons. I have some of my rods. I have 24 rods ready to go on the pontoon. I have some of those rods that are still calibrated that I have used almost every day for the last 3 years. Because I do calibrate them. It doesn't lose its diameter and it doesn't stretch like mono does when it gets wet. So once you get it calibrated, it stays there unless you have a big mix up. And I run a leader, so everything bad happens on my fluorocarbon leader. If you guys know me, I run a lot of flicker shads on Saginaw Bay, and I run a lot of 25 back, 35 back, 45 back. Those are my 3 numbers 90% of the time. Those releases on the offshore boards are going on the same place time after time after time after time after time again. And getting some of these rods are going to go on their 4th season without being changed. You can't do that with monofilament. I don't care what monofilaments you run. You keep putting clips on the same exact spot, you're going to get 10, maybe 12 trips, and that line is going to start to get frayed. It's going to kind of break apart. You're going to see little hairs, and that means that the line is shot. Fluorocarbon Troll FC, Crank FC does not do that. So yes, it's a little more expensive. It's about 3 times the cost of a traditional monofilament, but you're going to get 2, 3, 4 years out of it, and you're not going to have to respool. When I was guiding a typical guide season for me, when I was using the Supernatural Mono, which I still love, the Sunline Supernatural Mono, I was respooling, not recalibrating, respooling because of the wear and tear 2 to 3 times a season. Well, now I've got lines or rods with Troll FC that I'm going on my 4th season without changing the line. So it's kind of a cost value thing. So something to think about as you're rigging up your trolling rods. Okay. Let's get rid of that. Jeez. All right, the last one I want to talk about is a castable fluorocarbon. I use this for 2 different situations. So a castable fluorocarbon like a Sunline FC Sniper, which is kind of one of the leaders in the fluorocarbon world. Thinner diameter. It's kind of more like a Berkeley XL type of line. Thin diameter, very low memory, so it doesn't coil. Lower stretch, so it has very, very high sensitivity. And it's great on spinning reels or bait casting reels. FC Sniper, I think they make all the way down to 2-pound tests. I think they make all the way up to like 60-pound tests. So it's a line you can run on casting rods. You can run it on spinning rods. It doesn't have any memory, so you can cast it all day. It's a great line for casting crankbaits. It's a great line as a main line for slip bobbers. If you like slip bobbers, the slickness lets the bobber slide through very easily, and it has very, very low stretch, so it's got great sensitivity, and you get better hook sets than you do with mono. The other place I use FC Sniper, I carry FC Sniper 4, 6, and 8-pound on my boat. I use it for my leaders on my slip bobber rigs. Leader material is too stiff when those fish can actually look at that. You want that jig. I fish a small jig, it's smaller than this, but I fish a small jig below my slip bobber, and I tie a loop knot. I tie a uni knot and pull it open so there's a loop. And that 4-pound, 6-pound Sniper is very, very thin, but it still has all the advantages of fluorocarbon, and it lets that leech kind of move that jig around. So this is something that I use as a leader material. Main line, I use like 10-pound as my main line on my slip bobber rods. I use 4-pound or 6-pound as a leader. Almost all of my, almost all of my spinning rods are rigged up with Sniper on it. Casting crankbaits, casting small spinner baits for crappies or for walleyes in the weeds, jigging rods that I'm not using braid. So there are some times that I actually do use this FC Sniper for actually casting. So that's kind of an option that I really, really think is a big deal to have. So FC Sniper is good. Roy says he uses Sniper 16 for leaders, jigging and casting. It's a little thinner, and it's not quite as stiff as the leader material is. So it is a good option for jigging leaders and for casting stuff. So if you're casting jigging wraps, if you're casting and retrieving rattle baits, if you're casting retrieving, puppet minnows or shiver minnows, that type of stuff, the Walleye Nation Creation Rip and Glide, it's a great, Sniper is a great, great leader material to use for that. You obviously want a little bit heavier test for that. Okay. All right. Let's kind of move on. So 3 different types of fluorocarbon. Let's kind of move on. Anybody have any questions or comments about fluoro? Jeremy says he loves the FC crank. He's used it for the last 3 seasons trolling. I know Jeremy does a ton of trolling on Saginaw Bay, Lake Erie. Roy says he uses Sniper 16 for leaders. Again, a little thinner diameter, a little more movement on your jig than a stiff fluorocarbon. So again, 3 different types of fluorocarbon, basically a main line for trolling, a thick, heavy leader material for tying crawler harnesses, trolling leaders, tying up rigs, that type of thing, crawler harnesses, and then a castable like FC Sniper for thin leaders where you still want the advantages of fluorocarbon, you want a little smaller diameter, or you want to actually use it as a main line on a casting or a spinning reel for really just about any technique. Now, fluorocarbon does sink, so it's not the best option for jerk baits. I fish a lot of jerk baits. I did fish a lot of jerk baits when I was bass fishing. I still fish them for walleye in the weeds. You cast on a floating crankbait and you're kind of snapping. I don't like fluorocarbon for that because it does sink and it makes the bait kind of dive a little bit more than just on top. Soft jerk baits. Boy, that just triggered off something. Soft jerk baits were one of my favorite ways to catch bass. But anything that you want to stay up on the surface and keep coming across the surface as opposed to diving, fluorocarbon is not a good option because it does sink. So, mono is not dead. There are some great applications for mono, but I just wanted to talk to you about the applications for fluorocarbon and get you guys dialed in. I don't know anything about it per se, but I know a lot of folks use fluorocarbon under bobbers for steelhead. I know Lance Key, when we were drifting skein and flies and yarn for steelhead, he uses fluorocarbon as sluggos. I loved sluggo fishing. Absolutely loved sluggo fishing. One of my favorite ways to catch bass. I know he uses a fluorocarbon leader under his bobbers. You got to be careful if you're going to use it like on a live bait rig or something that's going to be close to the bottom, because again, fluorocarbon sinks. So it's not a great option for, we're going to talk a little bit later, a couple weeks, about weed walleye presentations. We talk about our weed drift rig. You don't want to use fluorocarbon there because it sinks. You don't want to use fluorocarbon on live bait rigs where you got a Lindy rig and you got a leech you want up off the bottom on a float, because fluorocarbon will negate the flotation of the float. So you want to use mono. So, braid, mono, fluorocarbon, they're all different. They all have applications. So hopefully this helps you understand what fluorocarbon you need in the application you are going to use. Okay, any questions real quick before we send her off to the second part of tonight? Anybody got any questions or comments? I'll wait a few minutes here because we're a few seconds ahead here. So all right, any questions on fluorocarbon? What to use, when to use it? Okay, let's take a quick break. We're going to kind of segue into our next session. Let's take a quick break. Oh, hang on a second here. Tyler says fluoro while on harnesses for running bottom bouncers can be an issue. Great point. So Tyler's right? When you're running on bottom bouncers, even though fluoro is a good option because of the abrasion resistance, if you're going to fish really, really slow bouncers, and I mean slow bouncers, fluorocarbon may sink too much. Bouncers at 1.2, 1.3, 1.5, especially with a good sized spinner blade, you've got enough lift for the spinner blade and enough forward momentum that fluorocarbon won't sink. A float is a good idea on that, but if you go really, really slow, fluorocarbon can be an issue on bouncers. Gio says, I've been using P-line fluoro coated on my bait casting and fluoro. Don't see much difference when fishing for bass. Can you give some insight on fluoro coated? I really can't because I haven't used it a lot. So the fluoro coated line, let me back up. If I'm going to use, let me answer it this way. If I'm going to use fluoro, I want all the advantages of fluoro. I don't want another line that's actually just coated with fluorocarbon. I think you're better off with an actual true fluorocarbon that's actually formulated for what you're doing. P-line, another great company, obviously Sunline. Sunline, I think I looked the other day, I think Sunline has 9 or 10 different formulations of fluorocarbon. And I'm trying to find a sheet. They used to have a sheet that basically they have like 8 characteristics of the line, stretch, durability, abrasion resistance, knot strength. And they had a chart for each line that kind of showed each one of those on a scale of 1 to 10. So you kind of pick the right line. But Gio, I like straight fluoro. Those double lines. We have a line that's one material and then coated with a second material. Berkeley tried that with their sensor line. Didn't really stick around very long. So I would tell you, stick with straight fluoro. Buy the right fluoro for what you're doing. I think you're going to be a little bit happier than something that's kind of a hybrid. So that's my opinion. I don't have a lot of experience with that coated stuff. I know what it is. I've never used it. So if you've got something to add, that'd be awesome. So Emmett says he fished P-line coated for a season, didn't like it. He's one of our, he's a bass guy for the most part. Again, I think it's one of those things when you try to do two things, you don't do anything right. That's kind of a one size fits all type deal, right? So I think just stick with straight fluoro. Okay. Okay. All right. Let's do this. Let's take a quick break. Let's roll into the break. And when we come back from the break, we're going to talk about gorpers. I'm going to explain to you what a gorper actually is, the difference between a gorper and a high-speed gorper. And we're going to talk a little bit about the etiquette of moving in on a spot where people are catching fish, because there is a right way and a wrong way to do it. Let's take a quick break and we'll be right back to talk about sharing spots with other anglers. Hey anglers, would you like to become a better troller? If so, check out a Teaching Fishing Trolling Bootcamp this summer. 4 hours of high-intensity, hands-on, on-the-water training with one of the teaching fishing staff will cover all the basics and pro tips you need to become a better troller. Class size and dates are limited, so use the link on the screen to get all the details and sign-up information. Learning to become a better troller is easy with the Teachin' Fishin' Trolling Boot Camp.
Are you ready for the spring Detroit River Walleye Run? Do you understand the 3 major migration routes into the Detroit River from Lake Erie, the timing of each route, where the fish that use each route end up to spawn, or how changes in our winters have affected the amount of fish that use each route? Check out the Teachin' Fishin' Detroit River Workshop, now available for streaming at teachinfishin.com.